Well, hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Club Grubbery on Thursday, the 13th of March. And this is a really great panel discussion that we're conducting today. We were waiting for Dr. Ian Brighthope, but he's been caught up. So Professor Brighthope won't be able to join us this time, but we know where he stands on all of this stuff. But John, it's great to have such a illustrious panel on our program today.
Yeah, Hoodie, it's going to be a great panel, and yeah, it's unfortunate Doctor or Professor Brighthope can't be with us, but we'll certainly get him on again in the future. He's an integral part of the program, and but nevertheless, we've got a star lineup.
We do indeed, and I'll start introducing firstly one of our regulars, Dr. Philip Altman, who worked for some 4 decades alongside the TGA and various other authorities, working on regulatory approvals for various pharmaceuticals and a whole bunch of other experiences. He's been very outspoken in the last 4 years for good reason. Philip Altman, welcome to Club Grubbery again, mate.
Thanks. Thank you very much. Great to be here.
Great to have you. And the man I only met the other night at the Inside program, Justin Sibley, who's a lawyer from Brisbane and who has worked extensively helping mandate victims, let's call them victims, in Queensland to get some justice. And we'll unpack that story soon. Welcome to the program, Justin.
Thanks very much. Great to be here.
And last but not least, Professor Joanna Howe. Now, Joe, you're an incredible woman. I sat in awe at the way you presented on that in that studio discussion on SBS. You're so eloquent, and I mean, then I look at your bio and I understand why. I mean, you're a professor of law at the University of Adelaide. You consult for Harmer's workplace lawyers. You hold a doctorate of philosophy and law at the University of Oxford, where you studied as a Rhodes Scholar. Congratulations.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Woody. It's really lovely to be here on
It's
the
great to
show
have
with
you.
you.
And of course, you're very much in the area of pro-life. And,
Yeah.
and as anyone who saw the Insights program the other night will know that that wasn't a position you always held, but we can discuss that a bit later on.
Mhm.
So what we're here to discuss tonight is the Insights program on SBS that Justin and Joe and I appeared on. And I have to say, and Justin and Joe would probably have had the same issue, or not issue, but a situation arise prior to the show where weeks before we were contacted by one of the producers or researchers. I went through an extensive hour-and-a-half interview over the phone where they posed a lot of questions to see whether I was going to be eligible for the panel. And I went through that and they said, look, we'll let you know in 2 weeks. And they said, yes, we'd love to have you on as a guest. I understand, especially having done Club Grubbery now for 4 years, how incredibly tricky it is to cram everything into a certain time slot when you're discussing complex issues. I personally felt, and this is just my take on it, I personally felt that that program would have been better served if it was made into 4 programs. There should have been one on abortion. There should have been one on vaccine choice to vaccinate or not, and some of the other issues as well, like euthanasia. And but there wasn't, and they tried to cram a whole bunch of stuff into one tight envelope, and for that reason, I don't think it worked. I think if there was one, for example, with Joanna on pro-life, there would have been a whole bunch of people who could have appeared with her and another panel likewise on the other side. But it was all interspersed. On our side of the fence, it would have been where we're talking about compulsory vaccinations. It would have been great to have Dr. Philip Altman there to really put the facts and share them around. I actually have looked at the program several times, and you know what I feel from the perspective of vaccine mandates. The promo for the show that went for about 3 minutes said more about what we were there for than the whole show did. And so while I appreciate the fact that a mainstream media organisation is prepared to touch on subjects that other organisations are avoiding, and while I consider that the only way we're going to get any traction with the particular efforts that we're putting forward is to get into the living rooms of people who are hitherto asleep, then we've got to be careful not to bag the organisations that take the steps to put us to air, because for many of them, it's a challenge. And I know that personally, when I was being interviewed, I felt that my time was cut short, and I don't know whether that's a perspective that Justin and Joe thought as well. But I felt I seemed to be getting shut down all the time. Kumi kept shutting me down. I'd be halfway through an answer and she'd say, "No, that's enough. That's enough." And she explained why she'd be doing that, and she told everyone not to take offense. But at the end of the day, it was, to be honest, I thought it was wishy-washy, a wishy-washy attempt to try and be balanced because it covered too many topics. And we'll unpack some of these issues as we go forward. So we're discussing the Insights program, some of the comments that were made on it, and also we want to talk about the role of mainstream media in the debacle that has become our society today. So having said that, there are several players on the Insights program that stand out. Firstly, Joanna, who was the first guest to speak, and as I said, very, very eloquent, well briefed on the subject, completely over the whole issue. We had Hannah Ferguson, who was put up really as Joe's adversary. Hannah Ferguson was a 26-year-old young lady, obviously very well educated and very astute and articulate, who had an abortion at 6 weeks. And lots of people will form opinions on the way she presented, as they will on the way Joe presented on the issue. We had Dr. Rebecca Hoffman, who, from my perspective, is the standout thorn in the side of the whole program, to be honest with you. She actually demonstrated such a lack of awareness on all the issues that she presented on. It was breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. And there were times, Joanna, when I think it was Hannah who was commenting and making some pretty crude comments about fetuses that Rebecca Hoffman was seen grinning in the audience and smiling, and they cut to her and she was nodding in agreement, which I thought was really off. Then there was another lady called Tammy Milne, who was the lady in the wheelchair, a very colourful personality. She had the tracheostomy, and she was a very interesting character. I don't actually know why she was there. She had very, very strong mainstream views, but they weren't backed with anything. And I'll talk about a discussion I had with her after the program. Then we had Michelle Hunter, who was the photographer, the music photographer, the lovely lady in the red shirt who was presenting, who was answering questions. And Michelle was vaccine injured. Once again, incredibly eloquent. And the whole time she was presenting her story about being so severely injured after being double jabbed, really, I think a lot of the program from the vaccination point of view hung on her testimony. I think it was brilliant. And there we go on. So let's discuss it from your point of view, Justin. It was great to hear you present on the issues around mandated employees, especially up in Queensland. And do you feel that you had a fair say in the program as it went to air?
No, I mean, I was disappointed, I think, as well, that it was so heavily edited, as you've said. I think also my questions probably didn't give me as much of a scope as I had thought I would have based on my pre-interview, but I still took the opportunity to say some things that are obviously quite controversial and not popular with the mainstream in relation to valid consent and the concept of fully informed consent. And that's a particular issue for me that I've spoken about quite a lot in the forums that I've been involved in. And I haven't, I should say that I haven't taken to social media the way that that you have, both Club Grubbery and Joanna Howe. I haven't done that. And at the end of the day, I'm a lawyer, and I act for clients, and I've got particular responsibilities to them and also to the courts, as you can imagine. So I haven't been on the airwaves saying a lot of things. So for me, it was a good opportunity to say some things that I consider have been glossed over or whitewashed. And they do feature in the litigation in relation to vaccine mandates. And the particular concept that I'm talking about is this notion that a vaccine mandate, that is to direct somebody to be vaccinated, is irrational and can't work in a modern democratic society. It shouldn't work, but it did. And the reason why it shouldn't work is because in order for any person to be vaccinated in Australia, that means that they're being subjected to a medical procedure. They must give valid consent. There must be valid consent. Dr. Altman would agree with me with that. And the immunisation handbook makes quite clear to people, to the medical profession, what that is. And it's been there and it's operated for a long time, and it underpins concepts that have been around since the Second World War. And that is that a person should not be subjected to a medical procedure without their fully informed consent. And it particularly highlights experimental procedures. And so when a person is being told that they must be vaccinated in order to preserve their employment, that robs from them a lack of undue pressure. So immediately you have undue pressure being applied to a person to get vaccinated, and it's no longer a decision that's being made about whether it's in their best health interests to do so. And so what I highlighted, or attempted to highlight, which was edited out of the program, was that the concern I had was, or the hope that I'd had, was that the vaccine mandates would fail because the medical profession would be unable to apply them. And what should have occurred, in my humble opinion, is that the moment it became widely known that large swathes of people were being forced to be vaccinated, not because they wanted to be or because they thought it was in their best health interests, but because they were being made to do it, the obvious question should be asked as soon as the lines started appearing outside of clinics and outside of doctors' practices and outside of vaccine hubs. The obvious question that should have been asked to determine whether there was valid consent was, are you receiving this vaccine because you want it, because you think it's the best thing for you medically, or are you doing it because you're being made to do it for your profession? And as soon as somebody says, well, I personally don't want to receive it, I'm being made to do it to preserve my job, there's undue pressure and there is not valid consent. And that medical practitioner ought not to have vaccinated people in those circumstances. So by ignoring that obvious fact, in my view, the system has let us all down, because vaccine mandates should not rationally be allowed to happen. They should not be able to occur in a modern democratic society. Now, the Human Rights Act in Queensland allows for limitations of the human right not to be subjected to a vaccine or a medical procedure, but the professional underpinning of the medical profession should not allow it to occur, even if a government says that it should. So that was a concept that I sought to try and cram into a question about why I was involved in, or why I thought it was important to represent people who are being subjected to vaccine mandates, because that was to me a very important concept, and that was edited out quite extensively. But I guess then a lot of those other things that I said probably didn't make a lot of sense as we moved on to other topics in the program, because underpinning all of my views is this concept of a fully informed, valid consent, and that's, we can debate all the other issues all day long, but ultimately that's what I think is fundamental in all of these discussions. And the vaccine rollout and the policies of various governments during that time and afterwards have highlighted to us a big problem, in my view, in the relationship between patient and doctor, and in relation to government policies in relation to the medical profession. And I should point out that there were many doctors who, of course, and probably even the majority who would have really had significant problems with what was occurring, but they also were subject to coercion, and they were subjected to coercion in a number of forms, at least in Queensland, in that they were themselves forced to be vaccinated in order to continue to work. And in addition to that, they were directed by APRA in relation to their position on the vaccine rollout, and that also had an impact. And what ultimately, I guess, I would have said if I was asked about what I think should happen in Australia, I think there should be a Royal Commission in relation to the pandemic response and vaccines and vaccine mandates to try and unpack all of these issues in a way that's going to see some confidence in the public moving forward, because there is now a loss of confidence, isn't there, about what's occurred.
There is indeed. And John, I'd like you to ask Justin some questions a bit later on, because as pertaining to mandates, and you being an ex-paramedic and feeling the full brunt of these yourself. Joe, I want to come back to you, and Philip also. We'll be going to a segment in a moment where we discuss pretty much the reactions of Rebecca Hoffman, who's the New South Wales chair of the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners. And I know you've watched the program, and some of the comments that she made will come under your scrutiny in a moment. But Joe, the issue around abortion in Australia, for me, the program would have been much better titled "My Life, My Choice" rather than "My Body, My Choice," because I feel myself that there are two bodies in a pregnant associated with a pregnant woman, or maybe even more than two, obviously. And who speaks for those unborn people? Let's call them people. Who speaks for unborn people? And I think that's a message you tried to get across. And I saw the critique you did. If you go to the Dr. Joe show, you'll see an amazing critique from Joanna Howe on the way she saw that program, and you'll glean a lot from that as well. But how do you think it worked as emphasising the fact that there are two bodies at stake in a pregnancy?
Look, I think my biggest issue, Graham, and thanks for having me on this show with you. I think the biggest issue I had was the way they edited it to suit a narrative, and they deliberately aired things that were untrue and that they knew were untrue. And when I talked with the producer before the show, she told me what the information package was going to be around abortion, that they were going to say that there were limits of 16 and 22 weeks, depending on what state you were from. And I said to her at the time, I said, but Jen, that's not true. It's illegal. It's legal up until birth in Australia for any reason. And I, like you, Graham, and probably like Justin, I'd been through long chats, like probably an hour and a half to 2 hours to 3 hours with them, that they were all recorded. And I'd taken the team through the legislation to show why I make these claims. And then they still produce this heavily heavily biased, but not just biased, it was actually just blatantly untrue. It was totally fabricated. They produced this information package that was just a lie. And Jen had said to me before the show, she said, when it airs, you'll have that opportunity to say, well, that's not true. That's an incorrect interpretation of the law. She said, that's what Insight's all about. It's about being able to have that discussion. And then and I think in the 2 hours, I felt, Graham, and you probably, Justin, probably felt this too. I spoke a lot. In the 2 hours, I was given a lot of opportunity to speak, and everything that Hannah said, and when she made claims about late-term abortion being rare or needed in medical emergency, I immediately jumped in and would say, well, actually, when we're talking rare, there's 88,000 babies being killed every year in Australia. So that's 880 a year, 880 babies killed through late-term abortion. And then I explained that there's no medical emergency after 22 weeks, which requires you to kill a baby first and then deliver them dead, what you can do is just separate the mother and baby through an emergency C-section, which is safer and quicker for the mother, which is what you do if her life is actually at risk. So there's no medically necessary reason for a late-term abortion. Anyway, I did all of that in the pre-record with ample time, and I felt as I walked away that was a great opportunity to really clarify some of the myths around abortion that had made me pro-choice in my early 20s. It was only through doing the research and the investigation that I became this advocate for the human rights of children in utero, and for mothers to be actually told the truth. And instead, the edited version that aired, SBS aired the lies. They aired the lies that Hannah said, and they did it. They cut completely the bits where I clarified the law and the data in practice. And so Jen had said, you know, you'll be able to clarify it. There'll be this free interplay, and there just wasn't. And they did give me airtime. Like, I think if someone did the maths on how much time I got versus other guests in the version that aired, it would look like there was a balance. But in reality, there were 3 fundamental lies that were told. And so I did the YouTube show immediately after the program because I was so pissed off. The program I just couldn't believe the edit that was done. Euthanasia was an even bigger stitch up. That was just insane. But I did the show the next morning and put it out there. I sent it to the production team at SBS Inside, and I said, you guys need to watch this. This is my take on what went down. And last Friday, I actually sent a 4-page letter to the host and the production team, and it's been sent to the EP, and I put it on my Instagram and Twitter feed just so that everybody can read it. And it's just 4 pages going through what happened in the room, the claims that were made, how I responded, and I pointed out the actual lies that were told by the program. So I'm yet to receive a response, but I'm really disappointed, to be honest. Like, I think that show had the opportunity to go beyond these narratives that vaccines are safe and effective, and that it's my body, my choice, and therefore I can do whatever I want throughout all 40 weeks of pregnancy. Like, I think we had the opportunity in that show to do the deeper dive and to look at these really problematic things like vaccine mandates and the effects of on an individual's rights in the workplace, and yet all of that deeper discussion, it was just omitted in favor, in my view, of kind of like talking points that you just always see trotted out by the ABC and the SBS.
Yeah, it was indeed, and I think, as I said, I keep going back personally to Dr. Rebecca Hoffman. She was put a question by Kumi about, does an unborn have rights? And her response was just, she didn't really know, did she?
No, she didn't. I don't know if it'll work, Graham. I could possibly try and share my screen and show that clip. Should we give it a go?
Yep, give it a go.
Okay. I think the host has disabled screen sharing, so I don't know if someone needs to fix that at the back end. If not,
there you go.
Okay. Oh, yeah, great. Okay, we'll try.
Okay.
We'll try allow to share screen, and we're going to just click.
No.
Okay, look, maybe I'll just explain what she said then. So Kumi asks the doctor, Dr. Rebecca Hoffman, are there any circumstances where the rights of the mother trump that of the fetus? And the doctor just looks for a minute, and then she says no. And then Kumi says, why? Why don't they trump? And the doctor looks at her, and she clearly, I get the impression she's not, I'm just going to say it, I don't think she's that smart, because the response she's about to give is terribly inane and makes no sense. But B, she took like a few seconds to really get to this really stupid response. So what she says is, no, because the rights of the mother trump because they're here, they're present, they're human, they're alive. And so in that Instagram video, which, sorry, you guys couldn't hear the audio too, basically I just make the point that all of those 4 characteristics. So first of all, she says they're present, they're here. Now, they're just the same thing, right? They just mean the same thing. But so is a child in utero. If I was pregnant right now, both I would be here and my child in utero. Like, there's 2 human beings, as you pointed out, Graham. Secondly, they're alive. Well, the mother is alive. So is the baby in utero because they're growing and the test of whether something. Well, what does Dr. Rebecca Hoffman think a child in utero is? Like a porcupine or a dolphin fetus? Like, it's a human fetus because they've got two human parents. So the response made no sense. And it just exposed her, I think. I mean, she is an abortionist. They cut that out from the show, so people watching at home wouldn't have realized that she is an abortionist. This is what she does. It's her paycheck. Of course, the mother has more rights. They're the ones that can pay her. And there's plenty, as I said in the show, I'm sorry, I will let other people talk, but let me just make this point. What I said in the show, and they didn't air it, is that there are plenty of examples in Australian law where the right, the fetus are at least equal, or, you know, mothers mothers who endanger the life of their fetus through drinking or taking drugs in pregnancy, you can report that mother to child protection authorities from 20 weeks in utero, and because that child is at risk. Mothers are told under international law, you cannot do the death penalty on a pregnant woman because of the recognition that the fetus has rights. If there is fetal surgery, then the baby in utero is a patient. So there's plenty of examples, but Dr. Hoffman couldn't think of any, but that's because of her day job.
Exactly right. Philip Altman, to you now. Rebecca Hoffman's response to how long should the process be to test pharmaceuticals? You know, how long does it normally take? Her answer, how did you feel about that?
Well, I recall her saying, when asked the questions about the COVID vaccines, so-called vaccines, that they were safe, that the TGA said they were safe. She obviously has very little understanding of the approval process or the status of these vaccines. They weren't vaccines. They were experimental gene therapies under provisional approval, and the safety data just wasn't there when they were released by the TGA. Perhaps she didn't know that. Perhaps she didn't know that there have been 1,000 deaths reported to the Australian system for vaccine injuries. 1,000 deaths reported. That means there's probably 30 to 100,000 deaths. And yet she said, in an unqualified way, that the vaccines were safe. Using that word before the COVID vaccines were actually released, in fact, before mid-2021, was illegal. You could be put in jail for saying that any drug is safe, because we know no drug is safe. And yet she said that in a program. I was stunned, absolutely stunned. There has been no public debate yet about the safety of the vaccines or the vaccine mandates. None. This was an opportunity for the SBS and Insight to actually have a debate, and yet they didn't. And I believe they didn't on purpose. I've come to the opinion that media are purposely blocking any useful information and debate. You cannot deny the fact that the COVID so-called vaccines are not safe. In fact, they have been linked to more deaths and serious injury than any other drug in history. They have been reported to result in more deaths and injury more than 100 times than all other vaccines combined. And yet you get a doctor in a responsible position making a statement like that to the public on TV. I was absolutely shocked.
I was told prior to, in the days leading up to it, I asked the question, you know, were we able to debate with the other guests? And they said, no, we don't really do that. If you do, it will probably be edited out because that's not how the show runs. So I had several opportunities to hang it on the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, especially given that Dr. Rebecca Hoffman said that everybody has the right to informed consent, and it's the doctor's responsibility to share their concerns with their patients. But how can they do that when AHPRA, aided and abetted by the Royal Australian College of General Practitioners, silences doctors? And I put it to her in one of my responses in a roundabout way, in answer to a question, that the fact that we've got all this censorship going on is the reason why doctors at this moment are really struggling for credibility, because they're not allowed to speak. And she just sat there glazed over. And unfortunately, none of that got to her either. So it would have been great. I was wishing, Philip, that you were sitting alongside me and that you were asked a question in response to what she said. Because we had Professor Robin Cockford on, John, only a week or so back, and she said it is crystal clear that many health practitioners in this country and indeed around the world are not doing their research. They're just trusting on the authorities. They're too busy writing checks and cashing in bonuses to worry about doing proper due diligence. And that was something that was clearly evident by what Rebecca Hoffman said.
Graham, let me be, because I have on my screen here, to be absolutely clear, what AHPRA, the Australian Health Professionals Regulatory Agency, wrote to all health professionals in a letter dated the 9th of March, 2021. This is what they said, in part. Any promotion of anti-vaccination statements or health advice which contradicts the best available scientific evidence or seeks to actively undermine the national immunization campaign, in brackets, including via social media, close brackets, is not supported by national boards and may be in breach of the codes of conduct and subject to investigation and possible regulatory action. Unquote. Doctors have been suspended for saying that the vaccines aren't safe and effective. And that statement is true. And it is even more true now, after 4 years of experience, after all the data, after all the publications. Any doctor who says the vaccines are unsafe could have their license suspended or revoked. I'm currently helping to defend 2 high-profile cases right now, one in New Zealand and one in Australia. And these doctors are being pursued by the health regulators. And it is just an incredible situation.
Doctor, if I can jump in there too, Graham, I also made the point on that program that that I was aware, as everyone here would be, that there is a large body of other professional researched expert opinion out there about whether the vaccines are in fact safe and effective. And that also was edited out. But Dr. Ullman, that document you've referred to, I'll also read another line from it, which I think is in the overview statement. So there was a document that told practitioners on the 9th of March 2021 to read the joint statement. But it says this, and the joint statement I can't I don't appear to be able to find online anymore, but it says there is no place for anti-vaccination messages in professional health practice, and any promotion of anti-vaccination claims, including on social media and advertising, may be subject to regulatory action. Now, I referred to that on the program and made the point that also meant that doctors who would talk about whether or not the vaccines were necessary, as opposed to simply being ineffective or unsafe, would also be contrary to the vaccination rollout. And as you indicated, Doctor, that obviously have been many doctors who have been subjected to action by APRA and investigations and so forth. But what we lost in this process was the ability for doctors to be able to have frank and meaningful discussions with their patients. Now, Prime Minister Morrison, at the beginning of the coercive implementation, said, trust your doctors, go and have a conversation with them. Right? Go and talk to your doctor about whether or not to get vaccinated or not. And in the background, of course, those doctors were being robbed of the ability to be able to have those frank discussions with their patients about whether the vaccines were even necessary for them, not just whether they were safe or effective, but necessary. They weren't being able to have conversations with them about, well, look, you're 40, you're in prime health, you have no other health issues. The current COVID issue at the moment is unlikely to take your life if you caught it, and you're unlikely to even get really sick from it if you caught it. It's not the risks aren't out. So the risks outweigh the benefits in your case. That's my advice to you. I wouldn't get the vaccine. I couldn't have those sorts of conversations because it would be contrary to the vaccination rollout. And there were many doctors who wanted to have that conversation, I'm sure.
There were.
So it was quite pervasive, that coercion at the time. And that's what's robbed, I think, people of the confidence that they used to have in what they were told by GPs. And what that doctor was saying, I think, highlights it, which is, look, we're told things, we tell you things, and you just should trust that. And that was a similar message that was being said by other doctors at the time, which is there was a time when what GPs told their patients, they just accepted.
Yeah. Well, I've got to say, it was 3 GPs that helped me to wake up. They all said pretty much the same thing. If I were you, I wouldn't rush into this, but don't tell anyone I told you. How insane is that? We'll get back to you, but Johnny, I want to ask you. You were a viewer of the program, and you ran a pretty critical eye over the whole thing. We've been saying for a long time on our program that we envisage a time in the near future, which I think we're in now, where the mainstream media are going to look for a soft exit, a soft way out, because they know that the evidence is stacking up against the narrative they've been purveying for the last 4 or 5 years, and this was going to be they needed to have a parachute on. What are your thoughts? What did you think of the program?
Well, look, I think I'm getting a bit of criticism online from a certain person about my comments on club grubbery last week about it. But look, Hoodie, I believe that in relation to the vaccine stuff, and that's where I'm looking at realistically, because that's where club grubbery has really been focusing on. I thought it was okay. I mean, it wasn't groundbreaking, it wasn't fantastic, but could have been a lot worse. I think the fact that they showed vaccine injured people there and were allowing them to talk, and in fact they closed out the show with a vaccine injured person, was symbolic of where we might be heading on this. And I mean, we've got to take into consideration. I mean, this is an absolute lefty program. This organisation, SBS, I mean, they're as woke can be. So for me to be saying that, I think does speak a little bit in favour of at least getting that conversation out there. I mean, we're able now to expose these people like Rebecca Hoffman for who they are. I mean, these people are essentially a sieve. I mean, the information is stopping at these organisations, these regulatory bodies, these professional spearheads, these people who profess to know everything, but really and truly, they're the dumbest people in the room. We've got the smartest person in the room, Joanna. At the end of the day, why are people being fooled by this? I mean, look at APRA. I mean, Philip raised a very good point. I mean, we've said for years, Hoodie, that this should be about being proactive in the safety space, human factors. I was suspended as a paramedic for speaking out against the vaccines. They've now come after me again for comments that I've made on club grubbery, accusing me of civil disobedience. But I mean, here we have Back in 2021, the 20th of August, 2021, the New South Wales Ambulance Service, ultimately probably one of the biggest ambulance service in the world, after they'd sacked us, put out a clinical safety notice that says the Clinical Excellence Commission have issued the attached safety notice relating to the risk of adverse events, specifically myocarditis and pericarditis in people who have received mRNA COVID-19 vaccinations, Pfizer and Moderna. Implications for New South Wales Ambulance. Clinicians should have a high index of suspicion for all patients who have any of the identified symptoms following vaccination. The risk is particularly evident in young males under 30 years of age. Now, how on God's earth are you grubs at APRA, SBS and everyone else, ABC, mainstream media, covering this garbage up? They are murdering people by the hundreds of thousands, probably millions, and you bastards are doing nothing. You're just turning a blind eye, ticking a box, and going after the people who are calling this out, all because of the money. Big Pharma. I mean, I've been told that a lot of these politicians are sponsored by Pfizer, and I don't doubt it for 1 second. And it goes to both heads of the Labor and the Liberal Party. It's a joke. Peter Dutton, you need to come out and categorically say that you are not receiving money from Pfizer.
Yep.
That's what you need to do.
Yep.
To have the confidence of the people to elect you as a Prime Minister, because when you've got a TGA that is 95% funded by big pharmaceutical companies, and you have Labor members of Parliament in the New South Wales Parliament yesterday, Sonia Hornery, provoking more unrest in the community, telling everyone to go out and get vaccinated, get your booster, and then at the bottom of her post, she says, and if you're an anti-vaxxer, don't bother commenting here because I'll block you. And then she goes on some rant in a later Facebook post about how her poor staff have had to endure all this abuse at the office. I mean, well, sorry, lady, harden up. I mean, I don't condone that sort of behaviour. Nobody should be making threats to staff in politicians' office. That's uncalled for. But I tell you what, you crossed the line when you started calling these people anti-vaxxers, people who have lost loved ones. I read some of the posts on there. They're outrageous. Some lady has said to her that she wants to introduce her to someone that's being vaccine injured, and she says, no, not interested. I mean, this is what you're dealing with.
This is what you're dealing with. And Joanna, you have been, you're outspoken in a very controversial subject at the moment. And you've had your fair share of trolls, you've had your fair share of mainstream media manipulation. Tell us a little bit about some of that, what it's been like for you in the last couple of years.
I think there's actually a lot of similarities in terms of the gatekeeping by activists, radical left activists who have a particular ideology. There's a lot of parallels between the way, John, you've described your experience of speaking up in this vaccine space versus, the abortion space. And I think one of the consistent things is about the control of the pharmaceutical companies and the money of the narrative and the money that they have. So, with vaccines, it was really difficult to find out anything concrete during that period of the pandemic. I know my husband and I, we booked in to get our COVID shot about we weren't one of the first ones to rush in, but there was this point where we thought, okay, it's getting pretty serious. We should probably book in. And a friend at work, so at the University of Adelaide with a science background, she just said to me, look, Jo, I don't want to tell you what to do, but I'm going to send you some preliminary papers that have come out that aren't getting airtime in the media. And so I read them. And then I said to my husband, I don't feel comfortable getting the vaccine now because I've read these papers and it's not what I'm getting through the media, but I can see that the methodology is rigorous. And I'm not a scientist, but I can see that there are clearly some issues. And that we're now, we are starting to see a whole lot of stuff come out. And we're going to see even more come out about the longitudinal effects of the vaccines. And we didn't get vaccinated. And I was so thankful that my university didn't introduce mandates because I wouldn't have known what to do. But my heart really just broke for people whose livelihoods were lost over this, over the lies that were told about these vaccines being safe and effective. And I think, you know, I have close friends that have injuries from them as well, you know, and I know we all know people that weren't injured, but I think most of us probably do know people that were. But in the abortion space, the people that are injured can't speak. The babies don't get invited to be on Insight and to share their story, and they can't speak to what it feels like to have their arms and limbs ripped apart by metal forceps at a gestation when they can feel pain in the second trimester. Um, you know, and we're not that method of dilation and evacuation, where the abortionist goes in and literally rips the baby's body apart without pain relief and crushes the skull, at a point in the pregnancy where they respond to their mother's voice and they can see light and pain, and they're fully developed. Actually, they've got everything they need the past 12 weeks, and that's the brutal method of abortion from 12 to 20 weeks, or the one after that where they're injected with potassium chloride into their heart, or digoxin, a poisonous substance that induces a cardiac arrest, and then the baby's delivered dead. These are brutal things. The pharmaceutical companies make huge amounts of money through first trimester abortion, which is the production of these pills, MS2 step. And there's about 70,000 women every year that are taking these pills. There's so much money, and it's all government funded, and they're giving all of this money to the government. In fact, these pro-abortion academics, Renata Klein and Janice Redmond, they wrote an expose on RU486, and they were just then ostracized by the sisterhood, you know, the so-called, you know, the feminists, because they dared go against the narrative. Now, I threw my career out the window the minute I started speaking up about this issue. Up until that point, I'd very much been on the right side, the correct side of every issue. I was an academic at the University of Adelaide, associate professor, researching around migrant worker vulnerability. You know, I was on Four Corners, SMH, they loved me, because I essentially, my research was consistent with their narrative around migrant worker exploitation. And I wasn't cooking the books. That was what I was finding when I looked in particular sectors like farming and restaurants. There were particular pockets of migrants who were exploited. What I saw happen was when I decided to speak out about abortion, goodness me, you know, like within 3 months, the president of the Australian Women's Lawyers Association was trolling the law school's Twitter account, calling for me to be sacked. There was hit pieces in the Advertiser that were just so unfounded. Activists were just complaining to my workplace. I've been through 6 investigations. I've not been found guilty of anything, no breach. But yet the university tried to impose corrective actions on me. They wanted me to do an anti-bias research integrity course, even though their own investigation found I did nothing wrong. And I actually took them to the Fair Work Commission, because it was such BS, and I won. And so I didn't have to do their stupid course. And the thing is, you shouldn't have to do this. Like, just because you go against the dominant narrative of the time, the establishment shouldn't weaponize the media, academia, and every other kind of force against you. You know, we should be able to have critical, robust debates around whether vaccines are safe and effective, or whether mandates are the appropriate response, or whether abortion up to birth is just too far, you know, and we need to think of other ways to support women in vulnerable crisis pregnancies, a way that doesn't involve just completely trampling over the human rights of the weaker party. So, you know, I think we've got real problems in Australia, and I took to social media. I didn't want to do it. Justin, I sort of heard you say before that, you know, being a lawyer, you're not on socials. And I was never on socials either. But what happened to me, the catalyst was 2.5 years ago. I was interviewed by The Guardian by Tori Shepherd, who's a pro-abortion journalist, and she asked me for a statement, because I just started to do some pro-life advocacy. I'd set up this organisation that aimed to get pro-life women into politics. Anyway, Tori Shepherd from The Guardian, she published her article on me, which was a hit piece. She claimed she never got my statement, and so her whole article was just a hit piece without any responses. And if she'd had my responses, they were very cleverly worded, and she wouldn't have been able to do the stitch-up job that she did. And so to me, that was not just like them stitching you up with your words. That was them not including you in the conversation, because they just blatantly are excluding your voice. So I went on social media. My husband had built up his furniture business through socials, and so I didn't even know how to use the phone or take video or post, but he set it all up. And for the first 3 months, he would do it in his lunch break. And then he said, "Jo, you're going to have to learn how to do this. It's taking too much of my time." So I then have now become, I've got 5 platforms. People can find me at Dr. Joanna Howe on Instagram, Facebook, X, you name it. YouTube, I've now got a daily show, the Dr. Jo Show, because my goal is tell people what's really going on and let them make up their own minds, and let's wake people up, because it's the same with the vaccines. People like John Campbell had a huge role, I think, in waking people up around vaccines, and we saw it through the alternative media that the truth was getting out.
There are lots of various reasons why why women choose to have an abortion. The rape incidence is brought up, for medical termination because the mother may die if the baby is born, all that sort of stuff. But there's another side of it too, which really perplexes me, and I think it applies to the majority of abortion. The problem we have in the world today is that most people think so little of life that it becomes more convenient to have an abortion than to wear a condom. Let's be honest. A lot of people get involved in casual sex arrangements, and the woman ends up being pregnant, and we'll run the risk because if you get pregnant, we can have an abortion. That sort of thinking permeates through all aspects of society, whether you're pro-abortion or not. The fact is that we think so little of life is really concerning. And for me, it transcends a whole bunch of things that we're dealing with. My wife in particular is so grateful to her natural mother because she gave her up for adoption. I'm sorry, gave her up for adoption at the moment of birth because my wife was conceived under pretty traumatic circumstances within the family. And so she's so grateful to her birth mother for carrying a full term. And then she went into foster care. And as a result of her being alive, she's been able to impact so many people in a positive way in the work that she does. And opportunities are lost when people are so frivolous about life. And that's the same with vaccines. We'll get our pilots at Qantas to get vaccinated, and we'll just run the risk and see how that goes. Well, a friend of mine had a defibrillator taken into the cockpit to him the other day on approach into Sydney. I know the guy very, very well, and he thought he was having a heart attack. I haven't heard what happened since then, but I know that guy very, very well, and I know how much he loves aviation. He is a pilot born and bred, just like I was, and he was coerced. And a lot of people, look, I mentioned on the program too, Justin and Jo, the plight of a Qantas pilot who was victimised by the airline because he was on sick leave. He was fighting 4 or 5 different cancers. He was on sick leave, and they still mandated him to get the vaccine. And he said, "Let me wait till I come back from sick leave, and then I'll get vaccinated." And they said no, and they terminated him. It's absolutely cruel. None of that went to air.
Yes.
None
And
of that.
that was a common story with police and corrections and other government employees in Queensland as well. People who were on sick leave or were on long-term leave, who weren't in the workplace, were hunted down and pressured unmercilessly to be vaccinated in accordance with the directive. And it became, in my view, more about crushing disobedience than anything to do with whether or not it was going to assist the Queensland Police Service and QAS and others to be able to do their jobs. But look, I wanted to say too, in relation to John's comment. I mean, obviously, John, you're in a very unique position, not unique, unfortunately, but you've been through a terrible event in terms of the way you've been dealt with, and so have you, Graham. And so I totally understand your views, and they're not uncommon things that get said to me by people that I represent as well. But I do also think, John, that at least there was some discussion, and I did say on my Facebook that I do applaud the SBS for actually having a discussion about vaccines, and I agree to Graham. I think you said that the comments that were made by the vaccine injured, the fact that that's actually getting some airtime is very good, because it's been whitewashed for so long. And that story about about being told that it was her mental health, that's a common story that I've heard. That people were just treated as though there could not possibly be a problem with the vaccines. And so for a long time, people were not diagnosed with having any issues to do with their health as a result of the vaccines. So that the fact that that discussion occurred, I think that's to be applauded. I do agree, though, that it could have been a far more fulsome discussion. And it would have been better, as you said, Graham, to perhaps break it up into individual segments about those discrete topics.
John,
I have a slightly different take, if I may. Given the information that we now have at our disposal, I think a lot of the people who push these vaccines on people, who push the policies, who cause the destruction, cause the deaths and injuries, know at some point in the future there will be hell to pay for it. And I believe some of what we've seen in, for example, the SBS Insight program to some extent is a CYA exercise.
Yeah.
Because they know it's coming.
Yeah.
And they want to be able to say, oh, but we had people on our program who were vaccine injured and we gave them a chance to speak. You see this in other areas now. You would have seen in the last month, if you were listening closely, to Dr. Fauci admitting that there was no science behind the claim that the vaccines prevented transmission. There was no science behind the lockdowns. There was no science behind the social distancing. Even Dr. Birx, both of these people were on the COVID task force under President Trump, have now been coming out and admitting there was no science. Even the previous CDC director, Redfield, has admitted it a number of times. These people are basically engaging in a CYA exercise because they know what's coming.
It's hard to disagree with that. It is, and we've been saying it, John. We said about 3 years ago the Four Corners will come out with this big expose in a year or two, saying that they've been working undercover for the last 4 years to uncover the corruption behind health in this country. And but I think while we've got such an illustrious panel, there is one standout thing. It's not really related to the program, yet it is. Justin, you were successful in the Supreme Court in Queensland for bringing justice to police officers and QAS employees. Am I right?
Yes, so that's right. There's a number of actions that we're involved in on behalf of a number of different government agencies, and another firm in Brisbane is also involved in those.
Just before we go on, I'm personally a good friend of a Queensland copper who got his job back, and he said it was great. He was treated with love and respect when he came back. He opened his locker, and it was just like the way it was when he left it. And he's loving the job again, and he's being treated well. Others aren't. In spite of the fact that you have been victorious in the Supreme Court, John and I know of 40 paramedics in Queensland who are still unemployed. How can that be?
Well, look, this is there are so many issues with what's happened. And on that point, one of them is that even though there were challenges in the Supreme Court underway in relation to QAS, nurses, teachers. So I'm involved, my firm is involved in teachers, correctional officers, and police. Another firm was involved in Queensland Ambulance Service and nurses, and we're working together. And I should say that those employees would rightfully feel very let down by the organisations that should have protected them during this process. And it fell to a couple of small firms to fight these and judicially review these directives. Okay, but that's a broader discussion that no doubt also would open lots of cans of worms that I won't go into now. But during that process, we had these challenges underway. It took us an extraordinary length of time to get we got a trial quite quickly, but it took us almost 2.5 years to get a decision on the first trial, which happened to be in relation to Queensland Police Services vaccine mandates and Queensland Ambulance Service vaccine. So that those two have run. Whilst we're waiting for other things to occur, the correctional officers' directives, the teachers' directive, and the nurses' directives, they are still awaiting a determination as to whether they were lawful or not. Notwithstanding that those challenges are underway, all those agencies set upon a process of terminating people for non-compliance as quickly as they could and steadfastly throughout the process. So in relation to police, right up until the decision was handed down that it was unlawful, police were still being terminated for not having complied. And there were a couple of things that held that process up for them that weren't to do with the challenges that slowed it down, but otherwise they were terminating people for non-compliance. Now I'll just juxtapose that with what occurs in other cases, because we represent essential services personnel from those different agencies I just talked about, and we protect them in a range of different ways. But if a person working for the Queensland Police Service as an operational police officer was accused of a criminal offence, they almost certainly would be, if it was found that it was necessary to suspend them, they would almost certainly be suspended on pay, and they would remain suspended on pay until there was a final determination about whether or not the offence had been committed. So if they were convicted or acquitted, etc., and they would be enjoying the presumption that they were innocent until that final outcome. And that's a very important thing in those disciplinary processes. It's quite unusual to suspend somebody without pay. But in addition to that, when you have the challenge that's underway to determine whether or not the directive was lawful or not, to then say, well, as far as we're concerned, at the time that it was given, it was lawful, we're going to terminate you, even though we are still waiting to hear from a Supreme Court justice as to whether or not the directives were lawful. That, to me, jars, and it jars with a lot of people, because those individuals were awaiting a decision from a Supreme Court justice to see whether or not the directives were in fact a breach of their human rights. And of course, in the case of the Queensland Police Service, it came down on their side. But in the meantime, many people have been terminated from those roles, and there's a slow clawing back of the process to try and get those people back to work. But it is by no means guaranteed, because they've been terminated, and they were terminated on the back of a decision by a decision maker that the directive at the time was lawful, notwithstanding the very clear challenges that were underway in relation to them. So I'm not surprised to hear that there are a large body of people that you know that are still waiting to get back to work and may not get back to work.
Johnny, final question to you, buddy.
Well, I think it'd be nice to understand, Justin, what the difference is in Queensland. Why there was an ability to interpret the law for a good outcome there, but in every other jurisdiction, it's just basically fallen flat.
Well, we have the benefit of a Human Rights Act, and it was passed in 2019, and one of the things I say is that it became a bit of an inconvenient truth when the vaccines became an issue, because the Act specifically embodies human rights and protects them. But unfortunately, it provides for limitations of those rights, and I'll just mention that in a second. But in New South Wales, in particular, there is no Human Rights Act, and in the Commonwealth space, there's no Human Rights Act. And one of the things that I think needs to come out of all of this is, and part of that Royal Commission, perhaps, or the efforts of people bringing this into the public domain, is a discussion about the protection of human rights, and that some human rights need to be inalienable. They should not be able to be limited. One of those being subjecting someone to a medical procedure, torture, inhumane treatment. Those things should never be able to be limited under any circumstances. But Queensland had a Human Rights Act, and what happened in the Supreme Court decision in relation to police was a finding that although on balance the limitation of subjecting somebody to a medical procedure may have been justifiable, the police commissioner clearly did not properly consider human rights. So there was a finding that it was unlawful. But in New South Wales, you do not have a Human Rights Act. So then these complicated questions arise as to what is actual consent, and that came down to a decision, or a more of a consideration of the common law in relation to consent. Whereas in the Human Rights Act space in Queensland, His Honour Justice Martin found that you cannot have a directive that says that somebody is required to get vaccinated in order to keep their job, because that robs them of the fully informed and free consent. So it takes free away from the concept of fully informed and free consent, which is the protection. So we have that act here. I think it needs to be strengthened. It needs to be amended so that certain rights cannot be limited. And there needs to be a Commonwealth Human Rights Act that ensures that for all states there's protection of human rights.
I'm aware of your time, everybody, and we have gone a little bit over time. I just briefly want to get back to the program, and then we'll sign it off. But the lady in the wheelchair, Tammy Milne, was very interesting in the process of the interviews that were being conducted. She said that people who were choosing not to be vaccinated were selfish. And then she went on to say, when she was talking about another issue, that that people with disability demand the right to be able to give informed consent without coercion. So there's a whole bunch of double standards going on. And I ran into her after the program in the lobby. A lot of people just disappeared in a hurry, including Michelle Hunter. I wanted to have a chat to her. She was a vaccine injured lady who was so eloquent, but she just bolted. I think she was pretty annoyed with it all. But the lady in the wheelchair, Tammy, I had a chat with her, and I basically alluded to the fact you've had 5 vaccines, but you've been very sick ever since. Have you wondered about that? No, no, no. And then I said, well, we've interviewed, we've done 500 programs. We've talked to medical professionals and victims alike with some different views, who say that, even professors of great renown like Professor Robert Clancy have said we should be pausing these vaccines immediately. And she said, I've never heard that. She said, I get my advice from my son, who's a GP, and he says to me to get all the vaccinations. I then said, well, why are we getting an excess in deaths? Have you considered that? She said, yes, people are living longer now. That's why we're dying in more numbers. So, look, I don't want to cast aspersions on anybody. I really don't, because we've all got freedom of speech comes with, the rights and privileges on both sides of the fence. We should always acknowledge that. But I think the whole mix of the program was really tilted in one way. I have to admit, I thought the staff were great. I was approached by 2 staff who I won't name at the studio, who secretly said to me, we agree with everything that you've been doing. We really support you, and we're going to do the best we can to give you the best airing that we can. I'll just leave that at that. But I want the final question to each of you, and I'll start with you, Joanna. do we persist with mainstream media given any opportunity we get to go on and put our views forward?
Yes, the answer for me is definitely yes, because they still have an audience. And I think as long as they invite me, and, I will agree with Justin, what you said earlier, that it's really good that they at least broach these topics. And, for me, as long as I get invited, I will rock up because it's an opportunity to reach people on this issue. And I think I prefer to do things live. Like that would be my preference. But yeah, where there's an opportunity, I will. And just to say, I actually got this email yesterday just from somebody who watched the show, and they just said, hi, Professor Joanna. Wow, I just watched you on Insight and I'm astounded at what I heard. I've been pro-choice my whole life. However, have never known the facts of the details of an abortion. I had no idea of the truth of the situation. Thanks for shedding light on this issue. I can't wait to have these discussions. You have ignited a light in me of wanting to study law. I want to get involved in this. Thank you. So even if it's just that one person, it was worth it. But I also felt that even for the people in the room, I probably was sharing things they hadn't heard before. And I think that was useful too. So yeah, thanks, Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Joanna. And Justin?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I'll take every opportunity I can, but I think part of this process that must happen in society is going to be about a discussion about the role of media in all of what occurred during the vaccine rollout and the vaccine mandates. And the one narrative that we heard across every single channel, the 3 or 4 sound bites that were repeated by everyone, no matter where they were from or on what channel they were speaking on. The pandemic of the unvaccinated, roll up your sleeve, get the jab, all those things that were just repeated continuously by everyone. And there will be a discussion, I hope, about and some introspection by the mainstream media about their role in propaganda and their role in ensuring that those things are properly objectively discussed in mainstream media. But there is one other concern I'll perhaps highlight, because there is this system that needs to be thought about and discussed. And as you say, can we only speak on other platforms? The misinformation bill that was proposed recently, which I'm not sure whether you've spoken about, which specifically was designed to limit what information people would have access to. And one of the principles of that legislation was to deal with so-called misinformation during a pandemic. That to me was extraordinary and very concerning as a proposal, and thankfully it was defeated. But it highlights to me a real concern about this whole concept of being able to objectively have these discussions, including in mainstream media, that I don't think is anywhere near resolved and needs to be addressed.
Thank you, Justin. Agree with you 100%. Philip Altman. You're on mute.
Sorry, I was on mute.
Yeah.
The media has been complicit, in my opinion, in this whole saga, and they must bear responsibility for what has happened. They continue with their bias, and the most dangerous sort of bias to me is bias by omission. And they haven't been upfront with the public about what's been going on. I think we have to stay engaged with the mainstream news media, but I think these efforts to put in place a misinformation and disinformation bill is really sinister. This is a move to shut down what we are doing right now. Under a misinformation and disinformation law, we would not be able to speak as we're speaking now.
Absolutely.
And that would be disastrous. So The mainstream news media really have a lot to answer for, but we need to be engaged.
Engagement is the key. Johnny Larder, any final words from you, mate?
Well, look, I think everything that was said there about the media is very accurate, Hoodie, but we still need to stay engaged with them, and that's the reason that we've been able to access people like Ben Fordham on 2GB who have been very sensible throughout this process. It's we need to maybe reform the media laws so that there's not this overwhelming ability to edit out. I mean, who do these people think they are at the media or at the government that they can decide what's good information and what's not? I mean, that should be allowed to be deciphered by the public. And you, it gets back to the old story. I mean, do we just go down the pathway of having one narrative, which is in this case has been the government narrative? I mean, are we going to listen to the passengers in the plane? I mean, if the engine's on fire, are we going to tell the captain that there's a problem, or are we just going to sit there? And I mean, that's where we're at.
Yeah, good comments. And so we just want to wrap this up. I'll wrap it up with a prayer and then I'll come back with a final comment. Lord Father in heaven, we just need more compassion, more understanding, and an open mind. And Lord, there are a lot of people out there suffering with choices that they've already made or choices they're about to make and decisions that were made on their behalf by governments who had no right to do so. So, Father God, we just pray that compassion will rule and that we will focus on the essence of who you are, and that is love, and that love will prevail, even tough love. We ask this in Jesus' name. Amen. There are several questions that we could pose to you. One that I pose a lot is, do you think that the government is acting in your best interest if you are coerced, bullied, or bribed to do something? Ask yourself that question. The other one is, if you thought there was the slightest hint that somebody was tampering with your DNA or your immune system, would you like to know about it? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you need to support free speech from both perspectives. You need to put narratives aside and focus on what's real. And you make the decision. I want to thank you all for being on. I want to thank Professor Joanna Howe. It was lovely to meet you. I think if the program produced anything of benefit for me, it was the fact that I got to meet you and able to make connection with you. So thank you for being on.
Thanks, Graham.
I hope we can get you back on. There'll be a lot of other issues. Justin Sibley, it was great to catch up with you too. I must admit, I felt very much alone until you came up after the show and shook hands and said good on you. And we got to realise that there were more people in the room who were actually with us than were against us, maybe. I don't know, it's hard to tell, but I do remember walking in there feeling like an alien. I didn't know what was where and what was going on. It was a bizarre thing. So great to meet you, Justin, and thanks for all the work you're doing.
You too. Thanks, mate. Thanks for having me on.
And Philip Altman, always a treasure on this program, mate. You're very deliberate in the things that you say, but they always pack a punch. And we thank you for the work and your consistency as well.
Thanks, Graham.
Johnny Larder, you've often been heard to say,
You just couldn't make this stuff up.
you couldn't make this stuff up. Stay out of the trees, everybody. And don't forget what you did yesterday got you to today. Life is very, very precious. Value it from the time of conception to the grave. And this is a great country because you live in it. Value yourself and value your country. That's all we ask. God bless you all, and we'll see you next time. I think Dr. Jack Cruz is our next interview, John. Fasten your seatbelts. Bye for now.